Well, thank you guys for joining us this evening or afternoon, depending on your time zone. You're here at the I'm Safe, You're Safe, Everybody's Safe, Achieving Psychological Safety in the Learning Environment talk with Drs. Sarah Krasaniak and Dr. Bonnie Kaplan. And we will go ahead and get started.
Great. Thank you so much, Kimberly. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you for joining us so late in the day for our talk. The title of our talk, just like was said, I'm safe, you're safe, everybody's safe, achieving psychological safety in the learning environment. I'm Bonnie Kaplan. I am the residency program director for the Denver Health Residency in Emergency Medicine and an assistant professor of emergency medicine at the University of Colorado.
And I'm Sarah Krasaniak. I'm the program director at Stanford and a clinical associate professor of emergency medicine.
In the world today, voices are speaking out more and more about fear of retaliation and concerns around culture. This has been seen through multiple lenses: op-ed pieces, mainstream media, social media, protests, conferences, and more. These loud and important voices bring forward the need for people to feel safe and heard. The learning environment, as many of us in this room probably know, is not immune to this either. Individuals have been speaking out about not feeling valued. Voices have felt muted or unheard. In this talk today, we are going to define psychological safety, discuss the results that psychological safety enables, and then we will talk about 5 strategies to create psychological safety in a learning environment. I forgot to mention too, I know some might put questions in the chat. If we don't get to them during our talk, we promise that we will get to them. We'll have a couple minutes to chat at the end. So thank you. The 3 specific objectives that we want to get to today are the following: define the components of a psychologically safe learning environment, discuss the importance of creating a psychologically safe environment, resident satisfaction, team dynamics, learning trajectory, and identify strategies for educators to foster a psychologically safe environment at their institution. So let's start with the definition. The definition of psychological safety is the perception that there are no negative consequences to self, status, or career for taking interpersonal risks, such as reporting mistakes or problems. Initially, this was looked at in the 1960s, and then it was brought forward again, actually, in the 1990s to early 2000s. Much of what we do, as again, we all know, is about teamwork and collaboration. Edmondson is probably the premier speaker on this topic, and in 1999 and 2004, identified psychological safety as a critical component to team collaboration and successful teams. In addition, some of you may have heard Amy Edmondson, PhD's closing plenary session at the AAMC conference in 2019, and how psychological safety is critically important in medicine. The medical learning environment is an environment where teamwork is critical. In addition, the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education, or more informally known as ACGME, requires graduate medical education programs to provide a clinical environment where residents learn competencies for independent practice and patients receive supervised, safe, and high quality care. I'm going to jump to the outcomes that psychological safety contributes to. And then we'll get to the strategies when I hand it off to Dr. Krasaniak. So when psychological safety is present, the team dynamic encourages interpersonal risk-taking, it improves learning overall, and increases the likelihood that team members will suggest new ideas. Psychological safety has also been shown to be highly related to increased team engagement, increased rates of medical error reporting or speaking up, personal work engagement, and quality/systems improvement. Again, this is from Edmondson, a date of 2016. These are all great outcomes that we all strive for in our learning environments. It is important to highlight that the lack of fear is critical to the creation of this environment. Individuals and voices will not speak up about mistakes, errors, new ideas, if that fear exists. Okay, on that note, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Krasaniak to discuss strategies for the creation of a psychological safety in your learning environments.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Kaplan, I'm just gonna end up calling you Bonnie, 'cause how I've known you for so many years. So I don't mean to be overly informal, but I know I'll mess up. So thank you. And, I hope everyone, this really sets the stage for, why we should have psychological safety in our learning environments and why it is important. But, I think the important part about these conferences is taking something away that you can then apply to your own learning environment. So now that you understand a little bit more about why we need psychological safety, I'm going to talk about 5 strategies that you can use to do this on your next shift or the next time you're working with learners. So the 5 strategies are: discuss mistakes, set expectations and seek feedback, foster creativity and curiosity, build connection and trust, and make team members feel valued. So the first strategy is to discuss mistakes. So it's really important that we normalize that we all make mistakes. And this is a part of being a learner, and this is part of being a human who's practicing medicine. As a leader, you can model fallibility and say something at the beginning of your shift, like, I might miss something today. So if I miss something, please speak up. I'd love to have you share your thoughts if you think that there's something else I should have added to my presentation. You can also foster learning around mistakes. So you can use a mistake or a misjudgment as an opportunity to teach about it and explore that further. So again, turn that into something positive that the learners can use. It's also really important to be non-judgmental. This can be challenging because we tend to really celebrate successes. So the converse of that is that a mistake might end up being something that's really taken negatively, but be as objective as possible. So always speak about a behavior and not a person. Focus on what the observable behavior is that you witnessed. I noticed that antibiotics didn't get started on this patient within the 4-hour mark. Let's talk about why that's important. Let's talk about why there might be delays in starting antibiotics, rather than you didn't start antibiotics because you must not have realized that this person was septic. Why don't you know how to identify a septic patient? So really focusing on the behavior rather than the individual. And then you can remove qualifications from your behavior as well. Words like really or tremendously, saying things like that can be damaging as you describe behavior. So again, being very simple in your language and being very objective is important. So first strategy is discussing mistakes. The second strategy is setting expectations and seeking feedback. So it's really important that you provide a unified message about what your expectations are, and you let people know what it is that you're looking for. So you can say, today I'm really going to be listening to how you communicate with consultants. So I might be nearby when you're on the phone, or I might listen in on a conversation you're having. And at the end of our shift, I'm going to give you feedback on what I hear you talking about or how I hear those conversations going. That takes some of the anxiety out for your learner, wondering what it is that you're looking for, what it is that you're hoping to assess on the shift that day. So you can really set this up front. And then seek feedback, asking things like, how is the shift going for you? How could we improve? Doing a mid-shift check-in and saying, can we do something differently for the second half of the shift that might make this a better learning experience for you? And saying things like, how can I help you learn more effectively? Again, asking them to participate in this process will help create this environment of they feel like they can speak up and share their feelings and thoughts as well. This has to be timely. So you have to do this, in the moment, setting expectations at the start of the shift. But again, by inviting that input, you're going to let people know that their opinion is respected, and it's going to help you create this climate where people are comfortable asking questions or respectfully expressing diverging opinions. So that's how you can set expectations and seek feedback. The next strategy is to foster creativity and curiosity. There's a lot of great research out there about curiosity and how fostering curiosity in our learners can really prepare them to learn and prepare the brain to learn. There's a couple different ways that you can do this. So, have open discussions about differences in opinions. Allow individuals to learn from each other. As an educator or a leader or a senior resident in the department, try to ask more questions than give answers. So ask that why question. Ask, well, what if this? and ask your learners to think about things, have that curious approach to problems or curious approach to questions. Same thing with the creativity. What would you do if you didn't have this available to you? Like, what would your strategy be then? And really get them thinking outside of the box. Curious people tend to learn about and understand things from a different point of view. So again, taking this 360 view of a problem can really help your learners even be more resilient when something comes up. So this is a way that you can foster the creativity and curiosity in your learners. The fourth strategy is building connection and trust. So in a culture of trust, there's the belief that others will act for the good of the team. Again, we've talked about setting expectations, but that's a really important part of this, is being very clear and consistent with your expectations. This allows your learners to focus on learning, and it can reduce that anxiety. We have to be cautious with language as well. This QR code will actually take you to an article about an orthopedic surgeon named Martin Levy, who's in Boston. And he uses a clicker with his learners. And he marks behavior that he wants them to see with the example here in this article is about knot tying. And he breaks down some complex knots used in the OR into different steps. And every time a learner does it correctly, he'll click. And he talks a lot about the power of language. And so if you have a learner who does everything correctly and you tell them, good job, you did that correctly. And then maybe you have a learner who's been struggling with it and they finally get it. You're like, wow, that's amazing. You did a great job. I'm so proud of you. They each did the same action, but your language is saying different things. And so, I don't know that we all need to show up to work with clickers, but I think it's a really important and really valuable perspective that the way that we engage with our learners can be different, and it can really convey a different message. As leaders, we should be inclusive, so ensure to include everyone on the team. Again, we should be role models for this. So include the nurses, include techs, include students, include everyone on the team, help everyone feel like they're part of the process. And this can help create connections. So create these connections within your team. If there's a tough case, debrief it, share your experiences, allow people to talk about how they're feeling. And this is going to create that connection between your learners and really help refocus what we're doing on, like the work that we're doing for patients and society. It's really easy to get bogged down in some of the logistics of being a resident or being a physician. And when you can get that bigger picture back and refocus them on what we're doing together for society, I think it can really help. So that's how you can build connection and trust. And then the last strategy is just helping to make your team members feel valued. Recognize their effort, especially as a leader. And I think, we all, no matter where we are in our careers, can think about someone that we identify as a leader. But it's important that we all recognize that regardless of our position, we are leaders in our local environment, whether you're an intern, and you have a medical student who's looking up to you, or you're the chair of the department and you have very senior faculty that look up to you. We all have the ability to make people feel valued. At Stanford, we use, both Save of the Month awards, as well as a new part of our journal club, which is Amazing and Awesome, which is sort of the opposite of M&M, where residents are selected to talk about a great case or a great save that they had. And we really celebrate the great work that someone did in a case that would have been really challenging. So help your learners feel like what they're doing is valued and recognize good work. Show genuine care for who they are as individuals. This seems very basic, but remembering that someone has just come back from maternity leave, or remembering that someone just got back from Hawaii for their honeymoon, and asking them about that helps them feel like individuals and people within this broader team that we're working in. And that is the last of our 5 strategies. So just to review, the 5 strategies we have are discussing mistakes, setting expectations and seeking feedback, foster creativity and curiosity, build connection and trust, and make team members feel valued. And so with that, we will open it up to any questions that you guys might have. Always happy to take questions offline. You can email either one of us. But would love to hear, it's a small group here, which is great. I'd love to hear your experiences with creating psychological safety. And we'll turn it over to all of you, and Kimberly as well.
I had a quick question.
Please.
As a medical student, do you guys have any tips for, say you find yourself in a situation where the learning environment isn't as supportive? How do you navigate that, and how do you, foster an environment that is, more positive and leading in the right direction?
That's a great question. I'll provide my perspective, and then I'll let Bonnie answer, because we might have different perspectives. I think it depends a lot on sort of what about the culture is making it feel not safe. If it's a culture where you feel like you can't give feedback, then you're sort of stuck. It gets really hard. And I think the best thing you can do is role model. Again, even as a medical student, as a third and a fourth year medical student in your clinical years, you're still the leader for younger medical students. You can role model, even if you're not working in an environment where your attendings or your senior residents are making it seem psychologically safe. You can yourself start to help the people that you're working with feel that way. Certainly, I think you can always consider giving that feedback, at the beginning of your shift, going to your attending and saying, could you just let me know what it is that you'd like me to do this shift? You can sort of flip the script a little bit, whereas the attending should come to you and say, these are my expectations for the day. If they're not doing that, you can go to them and ask them specifically what they're hoping to watch you do. Bonnie, what do you think?
I would completely agree with exactly what you said. I think that I'd also emphasize that you as medical students play a critical role. You often are with the patients longer than we are. You often engage them and understand them at a level, at least sometimes in our institution, that's really tremendous. And you can be an advocate in that way. And so sometimes by bringing it back to patient care and back to the patient, you're able to bring back feedback in that way and that lens, and that actually enables a good discussion. Because again, like Sarah said, it's hard because different environments, it could be different reasons for different environments, but if you bring it back to the patient, then it often really can spark conversation and redirect the energy and the focus. Hopefully that answered your question.
Definitely, thank you.
I have a question about how you preserve psychological safety when the feedback is really hard. Like, I completely buy into this for on-shift teaching and on-shift feedback, but if it's something that's like really serious or an egregious error, how do you marry those two?
So, my thought on this is that this is where having those connections and that trust with your learners is so important, because, if they know that you give them honest feedback, that you have their back in other situations, it really sets you up to be able to have those more challenging discussions and give them that challenging feedback. And I think, also framing it right with that growth mindset of, like, this is where I really want you to be in a year or 6 months, is like to the point where I don't have to be double checking your antibiotic order. So let's talk a little bit about the fact that it didn't get ordered. And that way we can really help move you to that next part, which is where I want you to be as a third year or a fourth year. But yeah, Kimberly, that's really challenging, especially when it's not coming frequently, because then it seems sort of out of the blue. So I almost think that, doing like the Breaking Bad news thing where you sort of fire the shot over the bow as well, where you're like, this is going to seem a little bit tough, but it's because I care and I really want you to get better, is probably a good way to do it. Bonnie? Oh.
I would say the only other thing I would add, completely agree, especially is talk about the reason behind why you're giving that feedback. I think that's so critical, and how much you care about their growth. But also, I always make sure that I know who's around when I'm giving that feedback. And if I need to pull someone into an environment that's different, or, I've had you can't always do this, but I've had like our charge nurses hold for a second so we could debrief and we could talk about something, especially if it's a pretty traumatic event, away from others, and giving residents a break, or learners a break. And so give them permission and give yourself permission. And I always tell my stories about this, right? Of like, it's okay to not be okay with what's going on right now, right? Go take a break, take some personal time, and then we can strategize. So I think that's also important to think about where you're doing it. I don't know, Kimberly, what do you think? Does that feel reasonable?
I love it. All right, and with that, we're at time at 3:51.
Thank you guys for the questions and for the engagement today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kimberly and Robert.
Thank you.